Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Pair program. I am your host, Tim Winkler, alongside my co-host, Mike Gruen. So, Mike, I was recently reading that Lego is releasing a set that they're calling the Endurance, which is a model that kind of commemorates the explorer Ernest Shackleton. And it's like a 3,000 plus piece set. So kind of led me down this path. I know that you've done, a number of Legos down your career. So what's the largest Lego set that you've ever assembled, and what was it?
Oh, the largest? Oh, that's interesting. It was definitely something when I was a little kid. It was some sort of space station. I don't remember. I mean, it was the blue and red, like it was the old school space stations. It wasn't like, Star Wars branded stuff. So something along those lines. Definitely sat with my kids to do some of the bigger sets. But first of all, I have to say kudos to you to remembering to call it Lego and not Legos. So good for you on that one.
I had to fact check myself.
I do have a good Lego fact. They're they make more tires than anyone else. They're the largest tire manufacturer in the world.
Oh, that is a fun fact. That's pretty fun. That's great. What about you guys, Jacques, Sandip? Any memorable Lego sets that you built, either solo or with your family?
Yeah, of course. I believe a Black Star of Darth Vader, something like that. It must have been. Yeah, that's the biggest.
Yeah, that's a big one, though. I've had a few employees that have assembled that one. Sandip, about you?
I didn't do much when I was a kid, but more with my nephew these days. And then his demand kind of keeps going up. So it started with like the small $100 one. And the last thing is like he's asking for 400, 1,000. I don't know what is the next demand that is going to come through, but the kind of Legos he requests just keeps shooting up. Yeah.
Yeah, I had a little flashback down memory lane on this too. And I had one that was like this, it was like a medieval knight's castle from like the early 90s. Definitely wasn't 3,000 piece set. It was, we're talking a couple hundreds here, but it was a large one. And it's a good little memories talking about Legos. I know that's like one of like the go-to toys that we hit on one episode, Mike, of the goat toy.
It's
cool.
Awesome. I mean, I use mine structurally too. There's things that I've built to like for like computers and things to like
just to prop up your laptop.
To prop up all kind. I've actually got in my old apartment. I was propping up some furniture with some Legos to keep it from falling forward. They're pretty strong. It's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
Anyway,
great dual use example.
Exactly.
All right. Well, let's fill the listeners in on what today's episode is all about. So today we are diving into a topic that is reshaping the landscape of tech, and that is, cybersecurity, specifically within the banking sector, and specifically kind of comparing traditional IT environments and blockchain in banking. So joining us are two distinguished leaders within cybersecurity. First off, we have Jacques Boschung. Jacques is the CEO of Halborn, a cybersecurity firm specializing in blockchain. Jacques brings a wealth of experience in IT and cybersecurity, specifically in protecting digital transactions in the blockchain space. And then alongside Jacques, we have Sandip Wadje. Sandip is the managing director and global head of emerging technology risk at BNP Paribas, one of the leading banks in Europe. Sandip has over 2 decades of specialized experience in cybersecurity, operational risk, and compliance across several verticals. Jacques, Sandip, thank you both for joining us today on the pod.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Excellent. All right. Now, before we dive in, we do like to kick things off with a fun segment called Pair Me Up. Here's where we all go around the room. We spitball a complimentary pairing of our choice. Mike, why don't you lead us off on what you got for us today?
Yeah. Well, I'm feeling under the weather and I was all clogged up. And so my go-to when I'm stuffed up is to pair that with something really spicy. So I looked for the hottest salsa we had in the house and scarf some of that down and help clear out my sinuses. So clogged sinuses and hot salsa would be my pairing today.
And then hopefully a box of tissues nearby.
Oh, no, we did that earlier. I made sure to, we're all good.
Yeah. Yeah, I hear you, man. I just had my go-to for something like that is a bowl of pho, and just throw a little bit of extra sriracha in there.
That was Saturday. Saturday, my son and I went out for pho, and we have a great place right near the house. And sriracha and jalapenos and all kinds of stuff to make it nice and spicy.
Nice. Well, hopefully you're feeling good enough to get through this episode here.
Hope so.
We'll keep checking on you throughout. All right, I'm gonna go with the changing of seasons and thermostat wars. And this is something that living here in the DC area, specifically around this time of year, we've got these crazy swings in temps that could go anywhere from 65 degrees during the day down to 25 degrees at night. And so my wife and I are pretty polar opposites in the sense that I tend to run a little bit hot. She's always a little bit cold. And then, so during these times, like I'll check our little Nest thermostat and, it's constantly getting turned up and down throughout the day. And then before we go to sleep at night, I'll check it and make sure it's at a certain temp. And then I'll wake up the next morning and notice that it's magically set, a few degrees higher. And this is how we would, what we would classify as these thermostat wars in our household, where it's kind of like undisclosed. Like my wife won't say like, "Hey, are you cold or warm? Like turn it up or down." She'll just go do it, and then I'll just go do it. And so it's this fun little game that we both play during the changing of the seasons. But it keeps us on our toes. So that's my pairing for today. It's going to be the changing of these seasons and these thermostat wars that my wife and I play. I'll pass it over to Sandip. Sandip, how about a quick intro from yourself and your pairing?
Thank you, everyone. Again, I'm based in London. I've been with BNP Paribas for 7 years now, and in terms of pairing up, I think nothing can ever go wrong with a hot, spicy curry. And that does help being from India. And the fact that I'm also a little bit under the weather. But the good thing is I'm in Mumbai and I'm having a nice spicy curry from my mom. And that has really helped me recover much faster than the cold weather in London. So I'm not complaining.
That's funny.
Yeah, I dig that. I love a good hot, spicy curry. Ship some over to Mike here for his next nasal cycle. Well, it's a pleasure having you on here, Sandip. Jacques, how about yourself? Quick intro and your pairing.
Yeah, right. I am the CEO of Halborn. I started just 4 months ago. Before that, I was, as you mentioned, CEO of another classical cybersecurity, and I spent 14 years at Dell Technologies. And I am an educated nuclear physicist, which is maybe those days getting popular again. Now, speaking about pairing, I don't know if you know that, guys. You should. This year is the 50 years of something really well established in the nerd culture. What is it? This year. That's anniversary. 50 years.
I mean, I just turned 50, but I don't think that's what you're talking about.
D&D. If I tell you D&D, does that ring a bell?
Dungeons and Dragons?
Dragons. 50 years. This
really?
Year. Oh, wow. Yes, really. So my pairing, which is very well suited to blockchain, is from nerd culture to pop culture. This is what happened, by the way, with D&D. It was nerd thing back in the days. Yeah. Now it's pop thing because you know what? Game of Thrones, all those things are deeply inspired by this game. And the same is happening with the blockchain. Because nerd culture, 2008, and now it's becoming, at least in financial services, a pop culture. But Sandip will speak more about that. So that's my pairing, guys.
I like it.
I love it.
Love it.
Yeah, that's a great comparison. And honestly, so doing a lot of tech recruiting, we've recruited a lot of folks out of little Dungeon and Dragon like micro communities around here. When we were doing more local recruiting, some of our employees were parts of these big Dungeon and Dragon networks, and they've hired engineers from these communities. So it's certainly it's gone from nerdy to cool. I agree with you. Awesome. All right. Well, that's
but when it's becoming cool, is it a problem? Somebody was asking the question, can it be still trendy? But another conversation.
Yeah. We'll have to revisit this in like 50 years. Awesome. All right. Well, appreciate the intros. The pairings were awesome. Let's go ahead and shift gears into the heart of today's discussion. So, as I mentioned, we are talking about cybersecurity in the banking sector and comparing traditional IT versus blockchain. So, why does this matter to us? I'll go and highlight just a few common scenarios of digital banking that nearly everyone can relate to, and underscore that critical role of cybersecurity in our daily lives. So, whether it's withdrawing cash from an ATM, to sending a payment to a friend via Venmo or PayPal, or simply receiving your paycheck through direct deposit. And these are all digital transactions that require robust cybersecurity measures to protect us against fraud and theft. And we continue to hear more and more of these days, like of these stories that pop up of some hackers pulling off a bank heist from their couch. I can specifically recall during the pandemic this huge spike in phishing scams where cyber criminals would try to swipe cash, and by personally sending personal or asking for personal info by pretending to be our banks. And so I just it's a scary world out there. It continues to get scarier the more that tech modernizes. And it's continued efforts from professionals like our guests, Jacques and Sandip, kind of keep our digital transactions safe from these external threats. So I'm excited to have this conversation. I'm excited to continue to build awareness on this, even if this podcast is one small source of information to get more intel out there. I think it's super important. So the way that I kind of see this conversation flowing is to first have our guest paint the picture of the current landscape in both of these environments. We'll discuss some of the challenges and the innovations in cybersecurity, and then we'll wrap with some insights on what the future of digital banking and security might look like. Let's start with you, Sandip. With your perspective, what are the primary kind of cybersecurity challenges that are facing the traditional banking systems today? And then we can jump over to you, Jacques, for an overview more on the blockchain side.
Mm-hmm.
Sure, absolutely. I think from a traditional banking perspective, if you look at the challenges, obviously, I think the number one has been more around business disruption as a result of ransomware attacks. And even if not directly on financial services institutions, on our supply chain and the impact of the supply chain disruption on the bank as a whole. So I think one is definitely in terms of traditional or the legacy IT in financial services. There has been a lot of focus on ransomware campaigns. There's a lot of focus on geopolitical disruptions, and particularly cyber attacks as a result of geopolitics, which is again is a focus of attention. And then generally, I would say phishing campaigns or cyber-enabled fraud, which is again a big attention point for large financial institutions. So what has happened over a period of time is you have had essentially an IT, which is kind of almost like trying to catch up with the evolution on the cloud journey and different ways of doing digital working. And that has kind of exposed some fault lines in terms of different vulnerabilities that attackers try to exploit, whether then it is end user computing, whether then it is essentially the infrastructure you have to deliver services to clients. And then it has been a bit of a uphill battle because the way we landed in this traditional IT journey is the technology is kind of scaling it up, and at the same time we are trying to build security around it, not into it. So what has happened is you almost like had a situation where you started to build security around technology, which was inherently vulnerable from day one. Because if you look at the history of internet was not designed to be secure. It was designed to be collaborative. That's where they started first, saying, you know what, we should open everything, we should talk to each other, but let us talk about security a little bit later. And that's what we have been on this IT journey, where we are building on top of a legacy IT which has been inherently vulnerable, and that has been like quite a challenging journey, I would say.
I think the best example of that is like email, right? Like this idea of like, why would anybody spoof an email? Why would anybody send an email from someone who they don't like? That's the 60s, 70s when email from academia. And now, like, right, there's a lot trying to retrofit to make it so that you know this email came from who it's supposed to come from and the rest of it. I think it's kind of the history of the internet and how we got, it started in academia and in research and collaboration. Why would you need this stuff to be secure? It's an interesting evolution.
Yeah, and we'll expand on
when
that
they
a little
built
bit
it,
more.
actually, it was a very trusted circle, right? They never thought that the community is going to be so big.
Right.
When they started building, the original network DARPA, they never thought that in 20 years' time, like 1 billion people or a couple of millions of people would be connected to internet every day. So that throws like an interesting challenge. Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't think anybody thought digital currencies was going to be a thing at any point back then either. And here we are. And this is a good segue. I want to expand on some of that stuff, Sandip. But first, and kind of keeping with tradition of catching the other perspective, real quick here. Jacques, let's just real quick get your viewpoint on how blockchain technology is evolving with the financial services sector and why cyber is critical with this evolution.
Right. So, real quick, I believe we have to look back because for me, I have been in IT for 20 years plus. Big difference of financial services with any other industry. Now it's converging, but the big difference is that IT has always been the factory in financial services. Without IT, there is no bank. And that has been like that for many years. In fact, the first digital transformation of banking happened in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, where they got rid of paper and went into centralized ledger technology. And then at the beginning of this century, 2010, they had the second digital transformation, which did not really impact the business processes. That was adoption of e-banking, was adoption of private cloud. That was really a huge simplification of the basic infrastructure of IT in banking. And now, what we believe at Halborn and what I believe is that we are reaching the third digital transformation, which is the blockchain adoption for three things. You mentioned it just now. You said, okay, digital currency, that's one thing. So CBDC for central banks. Second thing, issuance of security. And third thing, which is really big in terms of efficiency in the system, settlement and clearing happening on chain, which will reduce the lead time and mitigate the risk. I know, Sandip, risk is a big thing on your plate. So this is what is happening now. But when you speak about all that, in that new digital transformation, security is everything. Because unlike in a classical perimeter, where between detection and response, you have a little bit of time till ransomware is really established with the first indices of compromise. You can have several hours, sometimes a day, depending on the industry. Whereas on-chain, if something is happening, your cash is gone. So we have a real hold-up type of robbery situation, which is really unique to that new digital transformation. And that requires decentralized system, a totally new way of thinking about cyber and risk.
Yeah, I've got a lot of questions to build on that as well, just in terms of, things like smart contract audits and some of the things that Halborn is doing. If maybe just take lead on that right now and talk through some of those strategies that you all are taking on. And this is a good segue into, what Halborn specifically is doing.
Right. So as you mentioned in the beginning, Halborn, we are solely focused on financial services and Web3 and on cybersecurity for those kind of institutions. So our customers are decentralized finance, but more and more TradFi because of the adoption we were just mentioning before. And indeed, we do plenty of those things. Smart contract audit is our bread and butter, really our daily bread and butter, because more and more on Ethereum, you have the ability to create an environment that enable those fast transactions, enable this equity issuance on chain. So it's really creating a new attack surface, like nowhere before. And it's really creating a stress factor also for the traditional banking institution when they move into that space. So we do those smart contract audit. We do design of architecture. We call that secure by design, which combine both the Web 2, and we can speak about that after, so the traditional perimeters, and the blockchain aspect of things, because you always have a combination of it. The smart, for instance, crypto wallet is more a Web 2 thing than an on-chain thing. So anyway, and you have API, and API are like cloud pen testing. You need to pen test those things. So that's Web 2 infrastructure. So we do that combination of things. We focus a lot on trying to bring our customers to make the secure by design. I think Sandip mentioned that before. Okay, we just added layer of security on an infrastructure. How do we think secure by design on-chain as well, and in a complex combination of on-chain and off-chain systems? And this is where we set our focus.
Yeah. The secure by design was actually on my short list to kind of talk with you, Sandip, on.
That's also a spoiler.
I don't know. It's obviously it's relevant. Sandip, can you kind of quickly tally on this in terms of how, are traditional banks adapting their security strategies in response to the evolving digital landscape, like technologies like AI and blockchain?
Sure. So I think if you look at blockchain, let's take blockchain as an example, and I've done a lot of conversations on emerging technologies in general, blockchain and AI together, in terms of how it's going to change the trajectory for financial institutions globally. And if you look at blockchain, I think the one thing that you need to understand in blockchain is it requires two parties to play. One party cannot play, because can I run a blockchain in my data center? Not really. It has to be somewhere where more than two parties can come and then validate the transactions, operate the nodes, and run that distributed ledger blockchain. What that means then is, technically, it is collaboration outside the boundaries of my network. And if you see all blockchain projects globally, you will see that they're outside the organizational boundaries of a financial institution. Maybe in AWS, maybe in Microsoft, maybe in Google, but not in their data center. So that changes rules of the game, because now you have a technology that is forcing you go outside your perimeter. And the moment you go outside your perimeter, the rules of the games are different, because it's a different environment, different technology and layers. That's part one. Part two, if you take like artificial intelligence as an example, and take a step back and ask yourself, generally speaking, right from politicians to bankers to CEOs of large corporations, how do they take their day-to-day decisions? They take their decisions based on open source intelligence. It's surprising, but it's true. It's based on what they see on social media, what they read on Financial Times, what they see in market data in terms of Bloomberg or LexisNexis. It's a fairly open data. Where is that data coming from? That data is coming from open sources. So now you have the dependency on artificial intelligence to tap into various data sources in terms of various decision making, which means, again, from a collaboration perspective, you're tapping into outside data sources. You're connecting to different providers, you're connecting to different types of data sources to make your AI better. And then that changes the security landscape and the security around it, which means you're dealing with multiple parties with an access to your infrastructure. You're looking at components you have never had before, particularly in case of blockchain. You have the blockchain itself, can be Ethereum, can be Hyperledger, the security of that blockchain. But then there is underlying infrastructure. You're running nodes. The nodes need to be managed. So you really need to look into all the different, I would say, artifacts associated with the technology and how that would be secure. And coming to a realization that one party doesn't control the security because it's a shared environment. So then you really need to look into the risks associated with shared environment as well. So I think blockchain is essentially kind of forcing organizations to relook more so what does their multi-cloud journey means to them, because this is a multi-cloud journey. This is a dependency on other parties in conducting business, and how you go about conducting that business with like shared acceptance of the risk as well, because the risk will never go down to zero. When it's in your infrastructure, you can try your best to reduce the risk, to minimum level, but in a shared infrastructure, it's very difficult. So blockchain brings some new realities, new technologies, and new components, but also in a way ability to make it much more better and more scalable in terms of running different use cases and experiments.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, Jacques, because I'm gonna assume that a lot of our listeners, have a common sense of some of these items that we're talking about, but I like to try to simplify some of it as well, just to make it a little bit easier for our listeners to wrap their head around. Can you expand a little bit more on the approach to smart contract audits and why that's so crucial for blockchain security?
Right. So we were just speaking about Dungeons and Dragons. So I would like to go back to the gospel again, but another gospel. So, in 2008, that was a famous white paper of Satoshi Nakamoto. That's the original Bitcoin white paper, you remember. And in that white paper, there was a diagram comparing the privacy model of traditional finance versus an on-chain finance, okay? And if you look at those two diagrams, comparing those two things, I mean, the difference is mind-blowing and is somehow, I would say, an executive summary of everything we are discussing. So in the blockchain world, okay, you have identities of the people making the transaction, which are hidden, but then the transaction is totally public, okay? In traditional finance, TradFi transaction, identities, transaction, third party, so the banks, counterparty in the transaction are all hidden from the public. So the Chinese wall is placed totally differently in this decentralized ledger technology that we call blockchain. And that's really important because that makes a hell of a difference. So you have access to all those transactions. So you need to keep identity hidden. That's why, by the way, millions or billions of dollars are still with Satoshi Nakamoto. We know that they are with him, but we have no clue who this guy is. So at least we can say that he was very consistent with his own diagram in his white paper. So that's really setting everything in the future. That's the paradigm that is setting everything when we speak about blockchain. So big banks, sorry about that, Sandip, I need to mention another bank that I know. They made recently, UBS has made recently, and they have published that, so it's all public knowledge. They have made at scale transaction model with digital currency between customers of their, okay, cross-border transaction. And they have done all that on Ethereum, so on a public chain. That's one model. But I know another very, very large custody, okay, who is doing in New York City, you will guess whom I'm speaking about. And they are doing a lot of things, or they are moving into permission blockchain, which is within the perimeters of the bank, having one blockchain, okay, which enables them to have some centralized means to manage, to orchestrate and manage security. So what I'm trying to tell you here is that I would say the outset is totally different between classical perimeter security that Sandip and myself know very well, the blockchain security, but within the blockchain world, you have different models. And smart contract, I am not ignoring your question about the smart contract audit. So smart contract audit is a big thing because smart contract audit sitting on top of a blockchain enable everything else. They enable all those DeFi. They enable those automated market maker. They enable those decentralized exchange, all those things that people in crypto love and use at scale. And those guys have all the benefits and the drawbacks of sitting on a public blockchain with exactly the conditions I was referring to which are so well described in the Satoshi Nakamoto's white paper. So it's really a totally different paradigm. On top of the fact that I was mentioning in the beginning, that if you have a breach, your money is gone, just like that. Again, not the same in the classical perimeter.
Yep. Mike, did you have anything on that? I know that you're obviously minds in cyber.
Yeah, no, I think it's interesting. I think there's nothing specific. I mean, but when I think about trying to, thinking about our audience and trying to bring it to their level, are there, like, what are some of the things that are, like, when we look ahead and that's really going to have impact on, say, the public and others, like how, we talk about this, but it's just not, I don't feel like everybody feels it just yet, what's happening with blockchain and the rest of it. And so,
yeah, right.
You know what I mean?
Just to this point, if I may, I don't know if you saw the news today, but there was on Nature, which is a scientific publication. Google released their new paper about their quantum computing. Mm-hmm. And they claim that in 2030, they will be able to release a commercial computer for $1 billion. So cheap price. So 10 times cheaper than what it is today. And it will have 1 million qubits. Okay. And guess what? It seems that 1 million qubit is exactly the computing capacity you need to break the code of the hashing function SHA-256 that is used, for instance, on the Bitcoin protocol. Okay? So that's very concrete, the statement I'm making here. So even for the blockchain world, we have to think in a time frame of 6 years about a post-quantum security. And I know that in the classical perimeter world, everybody is thinking about that. But once we can break that code, okay, it means that you can unfold a chain, okay, a Bitcoin or a fork of Bitcoin, and you can undo all the transactions potentially. So there are big problems which are valid for the flip side of the coin. So the side which is Web 2 security and the coin Web 3 security. But for smart contract audit, what we do is really to make code assessment. So we assess the code dynamically in the environment where you deploy the code, but we assess it also statically, line by line. And more importantly, we assess the business logic, because the business logic is the key. Because, a smart contract, it uses connection to the outside world, and that's what Sandip was mentioning before, to trigger some events, for instance, to trigger an exchange of an Ether for a Bitcoin, okay? And if you can manipulate those oracles, which are the name of those trigger from the outside world on the chain, you can have a devastating impact on, I would say, the integrity of your smart contract. So those things we do. We redo those analyses on the technical level and as well as on the business level of those smart contracts.
Yeah, it seems like we're going to have to run a follow-up episode in 2030 here when quantum is a little bit more readily available, and that sounds terrifying.
I mean, once you have quantum, you're going to have lots of problems with encryption and being able to go back in time and decrypt a whole bunch of stuff.
Right. It's almost going back in time. You're right.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. That's the biggest concern, is that notion of security for the future, not just securing transactions today, but knowing that they're going to stay secure for 50 years, 100 years.
Yeah.
Right.
Great. Sandip is back.
Yep.
Yeah, Sandip, I got a quick question for you, going back into more of the kind of traditional IT environment here. So, we talked a little bit about AI, machine learning, and how how is that going to play into the future of IT security for banks? I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, particularly in areas of like risk assessment and threat detection. What are some of these strategies that you all are taking on at BNP, for example, to kind of to combat some of these areas within these specific parts of security within like risk assessment, threat detection?
Sure. And your question is more specific to risk assessment and threat detection on traditional, or you're referring to blockchain, or this is in general question?
In traditional.
In traditional, yeah. So I think there is a formative impact of AI, specifically on how we look at risk assessments, because if you look at the job of any cyber or risk, I would say executive or a practitioner, it is essentially understanding how policy or regulations apply to our job, and then based on that, write a set of controls, and then using those set of controls, either rewrite those controls to make sure that they're aligned with policy and regulations, or then use those controls to perform risk assessment. And all of this actually can be done by AI seamlessly, and it doesn't involve any personal or confidential data because it's all related to ICT systems. So, so what we have with AI, and particularly AI for cybersecurity, is opportunity to industrialize risk assessments completely, because risk assessments are ICT system specific. They do not contain personal information. They do not contain any confidential information. And when I say risk assessments, there can be different types of risk assessments. Can be a third-party risk assessments, can be a merger and acquisition due diligence, can be a counterparty assessments. So I think AI is going to have a formative impact on risk assessment in general as to how they are conducted and executed. And that would also mean, because large percentage of staff in-house also in consultancy world is actually used for these assessments, which would then significantly change in next 3 years or so as to how it is done. And I think threat detection is a very interesting area. Um, and the spotlight is changing very fast, because traditionally we were looking at zero day vulnerabilities, for an example, and now you're looking at how does geopolitical tension change what kind of new vulnerability is exploited, because then you're looking at nation state actors having much advanced tools to exploit a zero day that was not on your radar before. So geopolitical tensions come into play. The new one, which I'm sure it has been talked about, is deep fakes, narrative intelligence, and that is the new thing. Is the speed at which the attackers are able to create synthetic IDs or fake IDs, and then they use it to launch different types of scam, is also becoming an interesting attack vector. So how do you go around detecting these threats, which is like a brave new world, and then specifically a nation state in case of a geopolitical conflict, the kind of tools they have as a private corporation, you're never going to match that tool and the armory in a way. So it makes threat detection very, very interesting topic. And what I've seen in last 1 year or so, there is more and more, I would say, technologies or startups coming to play in this space to help large organizations cope up with these threat detection capabilities, because this is a new kind of attack vector which has not been tackled before. And it has also the supply chain implications, which has not been very well thought through, to be honest. Is what happens in the case of a geopolitical event? How many of my suppliers are based in that conflict zone, or how many of my suppliers, critical suppliers, are based in that conflict zone? Because then it is going to have indirect impact on us running our operations. And if that is not enough, a supplier can be my customer as well. So then and I'm now talking about a liquidity risk. If I look at a very large IT services company, without taking name, one of the top 10 IT services companies, and all of a sudden they are at crossroads in Asia Pacific in some conflict zone, and they are my investment banking customer. So it's now I have a double whammy. One, our operations are going to get impacted. Second, I'm dealing with liquidity risk as a result of that customers or investment in that customer is getting, return off. So I think geopolitical triggers and the impact on supply chain are bringing some really new realities.
I mean, I think the dependency, I think Jacques was talking about earlier too, about how all these systems now, like everything depends on everything, right? Like when I started in my world, I had very little third-party code that would get included in our product. We just built everything in-house, and whether it was secure or not is another thing. But as we've gotten bigger, like we have more and more dependencies. And I think that the risk in that, especially in open source products and projects, and think about one of the areas, vulnerabilities in dependencies is one thing. And there's lots of stuff out there to look for the alerts and things to manage that. But even the people who contribute to those projects, and there have been cases of people taking over open source projects and bad actors taking over open source projects and being able to insert things in. And I think that has like these very big implications when you start talking about how now our financial services are moving towards things like blockchain, like all of these dependencies, and it can all come down to some crappy JavaScript library that nobody should have included. And it has this potential and rippling impact throughout the entire like ecosystem. And, it's the type of stuff that I think where AI and other things, that's the only way we're going to be able to deal with it at any level of scale. There's just so much. And I'm just sort of curious what you're seeing in that space, or if you're seeing any companies trying to tackle some of that stuff, sort of in that vulnerability, in that dependency management side. Either it's for anyone who wants to answer. Sorry, it was very long.
No, I know. I completely agree. That this is like one of the biggest areas, because with AI-based coding and the dependency on open source components in releasing your core product means you really don't know which nation state actor built that library that you are so fond of, and that is now integrated in your mainstream, production delivery. So I've also seen that as a focus area in terms of hunting down, making sure every the bill of material, and making sure that where that particular component is coming from.
Jacques, as far as some of the things that Sandip touched on in terms of the traditional IT security environments, are you seeing similar trends when we think carry this over into more of the blockchain security environments? Or anything else that's on your mind right now when we're looking ahead on what innovations you're foreseeing playing a pivotal role in blockchain security?
Right. So because of the nature of blockchain, and because of the speed, the ability of the money to vanish so quickly on a blockchain, we don't have all, I would say, this infrastructure of cybersecurity that a classical perimeter can have, which is in many cases articulated around the Security Operations Center, the SOC. They have deployed on their server endpoint an endpoint protection platform. And then they have what we call a security incident and event management system, which is correlating and, collecting all those logs and creating out of the logs, which is like a white noise, creating understanding patterns. Okay. And that's where, by the way, AI is playing more and more a big role, because next generation security, CM, as we call it, are really totally integrated with AI capabilities. So AI is playing at the same time the offense and the defense, which is, thanks God. So it's part of the armor as well as part of the missile trying to penetrate the armor. But now what we need to do, and what we are doing in blockchain, is to think about some of those models in classical while taking into account the very short response time we have. So we cannot really do a proper managed detection and response, okay? Which is really the big word in the classical cyber defense, classical perimeter. But we are coming with some tools. For instance, there is something that I'm sure Sandip knows very well called CVSS, which is a Common Vulnerability Scoring System, okay? to assess a system. So at Halborn, we have developed a BVSS, blockchain vulnerability scoring system, which is also based on exploit, easy to exploit, and impact, what kind of impact you have, but also if you can reverse back or if you cannot reverse back. So we have developed a system around that. We have also developed another system which goes into what I call policy enforcement. So in banks, being able to enforce your policy across your IT system is very crucial. So we have developed a smart contract which sit on top of other smart contracts and which enable you to make transaction simulation. So you can make, like in a sandbox, in fact, you can, but on the blockchain, on the productive environment, the main chain, if you wish, you can really simulate transaction, and you can also impose policy. So it's a policy enforcement tool. And last but not least, it's a breach prevention tool. So it's some level of centralization, and now it becomes interesting. It's some level of centralization in some things that should be, a kind of insurgent model, which is a decentralized ledger technology. So we are adding those components to make the blockchain more and more, I would say, compatible with some centralized component of classical perimeters, and more importantly, with a heavy regulated and compliant IT of a bank. So those are some of the key initiatives we take, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Actually, it's funny because I've filled out my fair share of security questionnaires from banks, and it is always interesting the questions that they ask and how it's clear that these questionnaires, these assessments are really built on this traditional model of how we've deployed software in the past. And I'm sure that there's impacts in, how we're doing, how they're working internally and all the different changes. Like, what does it mean? What's, if you're running in a serverless architecture, what do you, how do I even answer some of these questions because they don't make sense?
Right.
Like they're just, and I know what they're asking, but like, wait, can I just get on the phone with someone and explain what our architecture is? And then they'll say like, oh yeah, this whole set of questions is irrelevant to you. But yeah. And it's interesting to see the banks. I imagine it's even more of a struggle internally, right? Like I'm just an external vendor trying to sell in and I can, and I'm just filling out these things, but I imagine internally, there's a lot more that's going on those assessments and trying to figure out what does security mean within when you're talking about people who are used to a more traditional model and then trying to adopt or something different, please.
Right. If I may, I have an anecdote. In fact, Halborn developed that centralized smart contract system to make this policy enforcement 2 years ago, and they tried to sell it to DeFi, decentralized finance. No chance, excuse my English, no F chance to sell that to a DeFi, okay? So when I joined, I said, oh, look at that thing. This is fascinating. Some component of centralized management, again, policy enforcement. Banks should be interested. And banks starting with permission blockchain, for instance. And guess what? That's exactly the corner which is showing interest into that. So in this kind of wild west of distributed nodes and decentralized ledger for banks to bring some kind of central control, and I'm also curious to hear Sandip on that, by the way, was all of a sudden was raising some appetite for that, and we are having multiple conversations on that currently.
Sandip, we'd love to hear your thoughts on that. It sounds like Jacques has a personal request.
Sure. So I think I completely agree. If you look at, for example, the comparisons what Jacques has given, and I can start with like the layman analogy is in financial services. You have Moody's and Standards and Poor's to give you a rating of how good a financial institution is. Then you move a little bit towards cyber and IT, and then you have BitSights and security scorecards who are essentially trying to do the health and hygiene check and tell you, oh, okay, from a health and hygiene perspective, this is what your score looks like. And I think that missing piece of puzzle, which Jack probably has, put a spotlight on, is what is your security rating or maturity rating for blockchain adoption looks like. And I think where Halborn has come up with that approach makes a lot of sense, because uh, even though we may all agree on the basic health and hygiene, unless you create a scale, people don't know what to match up against. So it's very important that someone goes there and says, this is what the health and hygiene indicator scale looks like me. In relative to this scale, where are you? So I think it does help, and it helps on the security side, but it also helps on what again Jack tried to focus on is what we call, again, in terms of our terminology, is the risk metrics coming from blockchain. Because one of the reasons you're trying to do blockchain adoption, and if you look at the history of financial services industry, why is blockchain so attractive? The blockchain is so attractive because it gives you the data and metadata by means of smart contracts, where you can do risk analytics much more efficiently. And when I say risk analytics, in the distant future, not today, but 3 to 5 years down the line, if you have your real world assets tokenized, your bonds tokenized, your mortgages tokenized, imagine able to do stress testing in one click. If you if you ever try to figure out how many people are needed in a bank to do stress testing and be compliant with those financial regulations, you'll be amazed. You'll be amazed. And the infrastructure required to do that, because you have to have all these data from disparate sources, and then do that liquidity stress test or against different economic scenarios as to, in a nuclear event, what's going to happen? Are we going to survive as a bank? And now blockchain opens a completely new door, because you know what? You don't have to struggle to get data from 10 different sources to tell you how much exposed you are from a liquidity position perspective. Blockchain makes it way more easier. So I think the reason behind a lot of excitement about blockchain, we need to understand it very clearly. One is payments, because it removes intermediaries and it makes so much easier to do it securely without having intermediaries in between. That is the reason why we see so many payments, pilots going on. Tokenization, you know why? Because fractionalization. You can fractionalize assets. You can bring more participants in. You can open it to more broader part of the society, which was not the case before. So that makes it more easier. The third is the smart contracts, because it takes 3 to 5 days, maybe more, going between different teams, including legal, by the way. Every time you make certain changes in, in your interest rates or anything else, and with smart contracts is on the fly, you can make those policy changes much more faster. So I think a lot of these efficiency related changes, risk metrics, and security aspects make blockchain like really stand out in terms of where the adoption is going. So I couldn't agree more with Jack in terms of the health and hygiene indicators, the ability to enforce policies, which is very very important from a financial institution perspective, because then you're able to establish certain baseline and rules, and then you're a little bit confident that at least there is no deviation from this baseline behavior, and the infrastructure is running at a certain maturity level that I expect it to run. So it does make a lot of sense to me.
I think it's a great kind of stopping point, kind of put a bow on it here. It also reinforces why I love this format, because I think hearing that from your perspective, Sandip, and then Jack, having you kind of speak to it firsthand on some of the work that you're doing in real time, I think it's great to kind of hear it from both sides. And Sandip, I think that last little segment there was really just helpful to process it and make it a little bit easier for everyone to kind of understand when it's coming from those more traditional environments. And so, kudos to you guys for being a great 1-2 team there to help bring this conversation to light. We definitely want to wrap things up with our final segment here. It's a fun segment called the 5-second scramble. We're going to just spitball a couple of rapid fire questions, try to give your answers within 5 seconds if you can. And some will be business, some personal. Mike, why don't you lead us off with Sandip, and then I'll get to Jacques.
Sounds good. All right. You ready? What's the most important skill you look for in a new hire?
Attitude. I look for that individual's attitude to things and how they essentially handle situations. Yeah.
What's the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
There is no meeting that cannot be rescheduled. So focus on your well-being.
That's a good one.
So your well-being, your well-being takes priority over a lot of things in life. So there is no meeting, there is no appointment that cannot be rescheduled.
Nice.
Yeah, well said.
What's the biggest misconception about working in traditional banking? In IT, in traditional banking?
The level of maturity. Unless you come in from outside, it looks really, really glorious. But then when you go inside, the scale of it is like, yeah, it's and then trust me, this will come from anyone who is actually working in a large international bank. But again, I think on that topic, if you ever watched Barack Obama's interview, he said it really nicely. He said, "I've met world leaders, and they're no more than ordinary people and making the same mistakes anyone else would make." So I would say large corporations are no different. It's the same people dynamics that you would find anywhere else in the world.
Cool. I like it. What's your favorite part of the company culture at BNP?
We're very people centric. We take care of people. We look after people. I really like that. And you will not find actually anyone leaving BNP Paribas. If you ever go on LinkedIn, you'll find that people stay with the bank for 20, 30 years. I'm probably the least experienced person in BNP as of today, because everyone else at my level has been there for 30 years.
Aside from AI and blockchain, what is an emerging technology that you're excited about?
Artificial intelligence.
No, aside from AI and blockchain. Those are too easy.
Oh, except for so I would say the next one in my list would be quantum for sure. Very, very much excited about quantum. And I think people are going to miss the tipping point on quantum as well, because they didn't see ChatGPT coming in 2022. And we will have similar moment with quantum, where people think that, oh, it's 10 years away, and boom, and the tipping point comes faster than you think, and then you're not prepared for it.
Totally agree. I think, yep. I'll save that for a different day. What's the most outdated piece of technology you can't let go of?
My iPod, I still have it. That 160 TBs with all songs. I love it. Awesome. And I somehow I can't let it go, because because you can't be disturbed when I have that iPod right. And music on. There is no disturbance actually, and it's so easy to flip around and change the music and everything else. It feels so much better actually.
That's smart.
That's awesome. What's something you did as a kid that you still enjoy doing?
I've been like a big networking guy all my life. I always wanted to connect with people, make friends, socialize. And I do this even today. Even though I'm in managing director in a bank, I make it a point to at least meet 5 to 10 new people every week. It does keep on top of technology and what's going on. So yes, I am a prolific networker, and that's a habit that stayed with me since I was a kid. Yeah,
that's cool. What's a charity or corporate philanthropy that's near and dear to you?
This is an interesting one, but which is something we do in the UK every year. We do White Hat Ball last week of January every year to raise money for NSPCC, which runs Child Line, which is essentially a telephone line to help children in distress. So we do this every year. I've been going to White Hat Ball probably 6-7 years for now. It's an excellent charitable initiative. Roughly 800 professionals attend it every year. I think if I'm not wrong, we raise roughly like $1 million plus every year for the charity. Yeah.
Nice. If you could live in any fictional universe, which would you choose?
Oh, Marvel. 100%.
I assume as a superhero, not just as a regular person who's just getting murdered. And what's something that you still enjoy doing but are really bad at?
That's a good one. Cooking. Yeah.
Nice. All right. That wraps it up. Nice.
All right, Jacques, let's get over to you. Let's kick it off with, give us the quick pitch of how you describe Halborn.
Oh, Halborn, we are a cybersecurity company committed to enable the next digital transformation in financial services in a secure way, thanks to our knowledge of blockchain technology and the surrounding Web2 constraint and dependencies.
What's your favorite part about the culture at Halborn?
It's proof of work culture, meaning that people need to demonstrate what they can do, be it engineers or other people. That's one thing. And the other thing is that we are totally a decentralized company. So we are following the lead of our blockchain focus.
Excellent. What kind of technologist would you say thrives at Halborn?
Oh, Zoom, Teams, all those things, since we are totally decentralized, that's the way we work together. No other option.
Someone who cannot operate virtually, it sounds like.
No.
What kind of tech roles are you hiring for at Halborn?
We are hiring engineers, so level 1, level 2, level 3 engineers focused on the blockchain technology, but we are also hiring cybersecurity cloud specialists, pen tester, more on the Web2 space. And that's exactly what I was saying in the beginning, because we are able to combine the two things, which is the only answer for big banks like BNP, by the way, because they really want to speak with somebody who can both understand classical perimeters and the new distributed ledger technology.
Very cool. What would you say is the biggest challenge that's you all will be facing as a business in 2025?
So we are essentially a professional services company. So what we do are services. We deliver services. So recruiting talent is always very high on our scorecard.
Aside from AI, blockchain, and quantum, what's an emerging technology that you're most excited to see?
Okay, maybe sometimes nuclear fusion. It may happen.
Okay. All right. We just raised the bar. I love it.
Date TBD, right?
Well said.
It has been emerging for 70 years. So.
Yeah.
I mean, once we have the AI and quantum, I think that we'll be able to figure it out. Like we'll just have general AI will figure it all out.
Yeah, perhaps, but you still have some physical limitations that even quantum AI cannot overcome.
No, I know.
That's true. Quickly describe your morning routine.
I wake up early, I do sport, and then I am always back to work. I am not taking breakfast, just a tea.
All right. What is your favorite app on your phone?
My favorite app on my phone, WhatsApp.
Nice. What's a charity or corporate philanthropy that's near and dear to you?
Okay, we don't do corporate philanthropy. I do personal philanthropy for the people in Ukraine.
Very nice. If you could have dinner with any tech icon, past or present, who would it be with?
Richard Feynman. He was a physicist back in the day who really thought about the quantum computing. He was really the guy at the very root of everything. And he was a true genius and very funny guy. So on top of that, it would not be boring. We cannot say that of all the tech tycoons that we know nowadays.
Mike, you lit up. You know this guy?
Yeah, I know that guy. Yeah. There's some great videos. Whatever.
He was in the movie Oppenheimer, by the way. He was playing the character as a character in Oppenheimer. Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right, a couple more here, and then we'll wrap it up. What is the worst fashion trend that you ever followed?
That I did follow. Okay, mustache.
It depends on who you ask, but that's sometimes coming back as a great fashion trend. But
right. That's why I'm saying that. It's a little bit of provocation, right?
Yeah, it's a safe answer. All right, what was your dream job as a kid?
Dream job as a kid, pilot of a jet fighter.
Cool.
But then that came.
Very similar.
Forget it.
Yep.
Forget it.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. Well, that is a wrap. I wanted to thank you both so much for joining us, and you've been fantastic guests and sharing your insights on this obviously critical topic that is cybersecurity and banking. And appreciate your time. And thanks for joining us on the pod.
That was awesome. Thank you so much, Sandip. Nice meeting you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.